Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we try to bring you an inspiring story related to service above self, the motto of Rotary International. We have a special focus in our club on innovation, entrepreneurship, and education. And along those lines, we've got a cool piece today, which has to do with education in its purest, most passionate sense. So, presenting to us today is one of our own, Brian Liddicoat, who is a lawyer and lives in the Santa Cruz area. And he recently came and spoke to a group of my students at a school where I spend some time and did a presentation about pursuing one's interest in the frame of exploring abandoned railway tunnels. And so with that same frame, he is going to start sharing some stories with us today. So Brian, you are up. Make it happen.
Thanks very much. Excuse me. Okay, thank you very much, Rushton. As Rushton said, I'm Brian Liddicoat. I'm a member of the club, and I'm a trial attorney. I live in Santa Cruz County. If you follow my mouse, you see my hometown of Watsonville down here. And what I'm going to present to you today is a modified form of a lecture that I've been giving for local Rotary clubs and people here in the Bay Area. And if I were to give the full-length lecture, it wouldn't make an impression on many of you because if you don't live in the Bay Area, many of the place names that I talk about won't mean anything to you. So I'm going to try to adapt it for more of a global audience and tell you some things I think that'll be fun and interesting and useful, even if you've never been to Northern California. But you see where the area that my mouse is hovering over now. This is the Santa Cruz, Watsonville area in Santa Cruz County. And we are not even really a suburb of San Francisco in the Silicon Valley, the area that you see up here. We're kind of a little outside of being a suburb. And between us, meaning the Santa Cruz, Watsonville area, and the Silicon Valley is these mountains, the Santa Cruz Mountains. And they are beautiful, dark, forbidding, covered in dense redwood forests. And the way that you get from one side to the other is this little highway here, Highway 17. It's famed as a very beautiful road, kind of a dangerous road, especially in stormy conditions. And I've driven over it so many times in my life, just showing kind of some pictures here to give a little bit of the flavor. And you see the freeway and the dense redwoods on either side of it, that it always seemed to me that between Santa Cruz and the Bay Area, the urban Silicon Valley area, is this one little highway and deep forests to either side of it, but kind of terra incognita in these mountains. There's really nothing there. And I think for an awful lot of people in their busy lives when we're driving back and forth, that's the case. And so the story I've come to tell you a little bit about is when my life took a big turn, about maybe 10 years ago or so, where completely by a casual conversation that I was having with somebody about hiking locations, I learned what at the time was kind of a local secret, which is that there used to be a whole string of towns in the Santa Cruz Mountains that were all joined by a now abandoned, once very famous mountain railroad that included some of the greatest pieces of engineering in California history. 3 tunnels a mile long each, bored through the Santa Cruz Mountains. In fact, I never realized that every time I was driving over this little highway, Highway 17, I was actually driving on top of one of the longest railway tunnels in the western United States. And so it became, since at the time, this is about 2000, the internet is kind of new, so it was kind of hard to research very much on this. There wasn't a lot out there. Today, anyone that's interested can go to all kinds of websites and learn all about this story. But at the time, it was really a mystery. And we didn't have Google Maps, we didn't have Apple Maps, and so it kind of became an Indiana Jones obsession of mine. To kind of explore and understand and revisit this once mighty piece of engineering that connected one side of the Santa Cruz Mountains to the other. And between that, I was successful in inspiring other people to take it even further. People that were very young when they attended some of my first talks have actually gone on to write a series of books about this railroad. There's a website that was started by people who came and saw one of my earlier talks, and they've taken it far beyond the level of detail that I had been able to assemble. And I'm very grateful for that. And I'll just show you some photographs and maps that come from the earlier talk that I did. And this, again, for those of you who are familiar with Highway 17, it's the long central highway here in this kind of abbreviated map of the railroad. And the railroad that we explored came up here through the Lexington Reservoir, through a series of these tunnels, and then down into Santa Cruz. The part that made it interesting, exploring kind of the end of this railroad and then to the parts of it where there are no more tracks laid, is that at the time there weren't really any maps of where to find it. A lot of it was on private property or even just physically inaccessible. I learned things about railroad construction that I really would have had no interest in beforehand. One of the things you learn is that when railroads are salvaged, like this one was in the 1940s when it was abandoned, they often take up most of the tracks, they take up all the trestles, and then they will seal the tunnels with high explosives. And so the result of that can often be that you can drive to one end of the railroad and access it quite easily, and then you find that what previously would have been a quick walk through a tunnel like the one you're seeing here, you really can't get to the other side because it's a mile through, and then on the other side it might be a deep forest where there's not even any roads to that area anymore. Often these are locations that used to be very thriving towns, as you see here at the town of Wright Station, which is up near the summit of the Santa Cruz Mountains, once a very busy area, and today it's completely overgrown and abandoned. I guess you begin to learn little tricks. One of the things I learned is that for people that move to the Santa Cruz Mountains, there's an awful lot of people that became wealthy in Silicon Valley. They want to get away from the rush of the city, so they buy homes up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. They don't know anything about that area or anything that used to be there, but their kids, who are often bored out of their skulls, living up there off of Highway 17, they go exploring and they know where everything is. So I learned very fast that if you want to discover things or you're having trouble finding a location, it's often better to ask the teenagers than to ask the adults, especially dealing with maps that are long out of date and will to lead you to places that are otherwise inaccessible. Take down to some of the tunnels here. I guess the other thing, of course, you learn is that it's you can't really rely on your own. One of the things that's fun about what I like to call exploring old railroads doesn't have quite the cachet that the science demands. I prefer the term paleoferroequinology, which is a fancy way of saying ancient iron horse. That's the term that the community's brought up. The nice thing about exploring things like this is, it tends to attract the interest of lots of old guys that are interested in trains. And old guys that are interested in trains are great because they know how to do all kinds of things. Like when we discovered, or I shouldn't say discovered, rediscovered one tunnel that was very deep in the mountains. And I found some great old guys that were not only very good photographers, but had portable battery-operated Klieg lights. And so they dragged these halfway up a mountain. This is one tunnel that for the longest time I had just assumed was completely shut until I discovered that you could actually crawl through an opening at the top and get inside it. And so we brought up a camera and took some photographs of the interior. And this is another example of the saying that Russian and I have developed, which is, whatever your passion is in life, if you see something interesting, go check it out right away. Don't put it off till next year. This is one tunnel. We call this the Mountain Charlie Tunnel because of its location. And unfortunately, it resealed itself last year after a violent rainstorm. And it may reopen next year, 20 years from now, or maybe never. So I'm very glad that I was able to talk our visitors into going up there with their special light equipment and cameras. This gives you an idea of what it must have looked like before the salvagers came and removed all the wood inside of it. One thing that's for people that are interested in exploring, obviously the internet has created enormous resources. You can create maps like this. There's now, as I said, a guy that I inspired with one of my early talks who went and got a PhD in history and now runs a website called SantaCruzTrains.com and has created a map that's extremely helpful for all other explorers. We discovered that not only was there this one famous railroad, but a whole string of logging railroads in the 1880s that went all over the mountains. And so there's people that enjoy going out and exploring all these various areas and then coming back and adding to the map, crowdsourcing, so to speak, the things that they've discovered. I guess the bottom line for all of this is that it's fun to have a passion in life. It's very, very important, I think. And to the extent that you enjoy your work, that's great. But it can often be life-changing, even late in life, to come up with some kind of special interest that you have. You can learn, especially again with the internet. You can learn so much about engineering, history, artwork, organization in ways that just were never possible before. And you can not only meet people from all walks of life that share an interest. I have friends that are into exploring abandoned railroads all over the Pacific Northwest at this point. And sometimes I even plan my vacation around it. Perhaps, if we go to Oregon this year, if I can get an extra day off, we'll try to explore the Portland and Tillamook Railroad, a famous, fantastic logging railroad that may not be accessible for much longer. Once these railroads go out of service, they tend to get overgrown and collapse quite quickly. So again, another argument that one needs to go there fast before it disappears. But I think whatever your pet passion in life, that's something that applies equally. And I'm very, very glad that I put my Indiana Jones hat on all those years ago and took off and started exploring this. It's with all the people I've met, whether one's particularly interested in old railroads or not, it's made my life much richer. It's taken me to a place where I view my own backyard just driving through these forests that I once thought were empty and realizing how much richer a history and a present that they actually have. And it's something that I'm just extremely pleased that I did. I think I'll pause at that point and see if there are any questions from the audience.
Fantastic stuff, Brian. I love the pictures as they go back and forth there, for sure. I want to introduce the people on our call, and then we'll open up to questions. As I call your name, please wave if you are able. If you are Shags, you might be cooking at the moment or something. But if you get connected, all good there. Shags, start us off with a wave. Good man. Shags is in Walnut Creek, I believe.
Yes, I am cooking corned beef in the sous vide.
Good man. All right. And north of the border, we have Roger Plusted, our fearless leader on the committee for bringing in cool programs. We have Cecilia Babkirk, who is hopefully on her way to the Peace Corps in the coming months. So huge style points for that. Farheen Alessi, right, who is just she's someone who understands the cats that my wife and I love so much. So just how cool is that? And who is another wonderful presenter as a part of our club. So with that, who among our team here would like to start with a question? So wave at me and we will get it going. Shags, your hand was up first. Go for it.
Brian, did you get that download? Did it work for you?
No, please send it to me again. Shag sent me what was supposed to be a video clip, and the email came through, but unfortunately the URL is not working. I'd very much like to see it.
Well, it's not a URL. It's a WEBM file, which is played on a video player.
Okay, I will try downloading it again. It may be that my crazy email filters are preventing it from going through, but I'll look at it one more time.
I'll try.
We'll ponder the mysteries of technology as we go forward. Roger, I know you have a question.
Yes, I did. Under your land title system, did not the railway have to file a right-of-way plan?
It's a very good question. Railroads have a history in America. It's especially as to use and abuse of the land titles. In the particular case of the railroad that I explored, the railroad was formally abandoned by the Southern Pacific in 1940. It's interesting. I'll add in one piece of historical trivia, perhaps. This railroad that we've discussed, it's called the South Pacific Coast. South Pacific Coast Railroad. It was built in the 1870s, and it was briefly by far the richest and most profitable short line railroad in the United States, probably in the world. Its business was taking enormous train loads of cut redwood timber from Santa Cruz over the mountains to San Francisco. And once the timber industry here dried up in the 1910s, it very quickly collapsed. And so it went from being the most profitable to being one of the main loss-making short-line railroads. And the Great Depression also did not help. And in 1940, Southern Pacific decided to formally abandon the line, and they went through a number of legal procedures which abandoned the rights of way. There's sometimes speculation, about every 10 years it will bubble back up into the public consciousness. Somebody will talk about using the old right of way to build a commuter line, to which we desperately need some kind of solution to the traffic jams between Santa Cruz and the Silicon Valley. However, that won't happen with this particular railroad line, as quite a few houses have been built on top of the right-of-way. Old railroad rights-of-way, once they stop being used by railroads, pretty quickly start getting used as normal roads because they're very well built. I'll add one interesting story about exploration, which I meant to add in the original talk. When you start exploring things like this, obviously you want to turn to the experts. And they're here at our local junior college, Cabrillo College. We have a justly very famous local historian named Professor Sandy Leiden. And he's always been the person that anyone would turn to for any local knowledge. So when I first got interested in this, I called him up, and he's quite difficult to get a hold of. He's always being pestered, by people. And so I finally got him on the phone. I said, Professor Leiden, call me Sandy. I said, well, I'm very interested in the South Pacific Coast Railroad, and I understand that you know about this. Yes, I know all about that railroad. So that's good. I'm trying to explore it. I visited a number of the tunnel locations. I'm trying to, I kind of made it sort of a Don Quixote-like quest to kind of walk the entire right-of-way as much as humanly possible. He said, well, I could help you. I could help you find all of that. I know exactly where all the tunnels are. I could tell you exactly how to get there. I said, well, that's great. Perhaps, if you don't mind, I know you're very busy. Could we meet? Could we get together? I'd love to have you show me. Oh, no, I'm not going to show you anything. I said, excuse me, why would you say that? He said, look, if I tell you how to get to all these places, you're going to tell all your friends are going to start going there, and the people that own the property are going to put up fences, and I won't be able to get there anymore. I said, okay, I appreciate that. He said, but there's a second reason. He said, if you really want to find these places, you will find them. And it will be so much more enjoyable if you do it the hard way. It will be much more meaningful to you when you eventually get there. And he hung up the phone on me at that point. But he was absolutely correct, because as silly as it sounds, when you've spent weekend after weekend, or even sometimes I'd go to a court appearance in San Jose and I'd be on my way back, in my business suit, and I'd think to myself, I want to try that one trail at the end of the washed out road that I was never able to find. And you eventually, get to this tunnel location that you've been looking for. It becomes so much more meaningful when somebody didn't have to show you how to get there. Mm-hmm. So, long answer to the question. Thank you.
Beautiful response on that. Cecilia, you're next.
So this is really not a question as much as a statement, but I actually know someone who owns one of the tunnels.
Oh, that's great.
Because the railroad, now I'm not sure if this was one of the Southern Pacific ones, but they actually sold some of the tunnels along with the rights, the right-of-way. Mm-hmm. And so I know this gentleman from years and years and years ago. In fact, I'm not sure if he's still alive or not, but he bought one of those tunnels.
What is his name? I probably know him. If you remember.
Walt Hoffler.
Walt Hoffler. That name I don't know.
Oh. Anyway, I mean, I could see if he's still around if you'd like, but
that would be wonderful.
Okay. Well, and so then the other thing was, and this is related but not exactly on topic, there's a lot of property up there which has all been sold off for people building and buying homes that retain the rights to the trees. Mm-hmm. Where some logging company still has the right to go in and harvest trees off of people's land.
Yes.
And so I wonder how many of these people think they're just buying a piece of property. And if the lumber companies were to start going in and harvesting, what would they say?
It's very interesting. One of the other things that I learned is for those of us who are in the Bay Area, I think probably everybody on this call has visited Santa Cruz County or gone to some of the redwood tree state parks that we have here. And I always foolishly assumed that those redwoods, or most of them at least, had always been there. You drive up Highway 9 to Boulder Creek, for example, just beautiful, beautiful, lush redwood forests, and it seemed like they've always been there. And one of the things I learned from doing this project is that most of the redwood trees, with a few exceptions that are in the state park area that have never been logged, most of what you see as these lush, deep green forests have in fact been extensively logged, and at times quite recently, so recently that it would surprise you, were basically clear cut. When you look at photographs of a lot of these deep green areas in Santa Cruz County from the 1910s, it looks like Morgan Hill or Hayward, areas that to us Bay Area people seem totally deforested.
Right.
So that's interesting. One of the probably the only downside of this obsession of mine is that when you're doing this for a few years, you come to look at a no trespassing sign as more of an invitation than a warning.
Right.
Because you think to yourself, well, if they put up a no trespassing sign, that must mean that there's something interesting down that road. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put it up. And there's actually enormous valleys deep in the Santa Cruz Mountains, enormous areas, huge areas, thousands and thousands of acres that are owned by logging companies. Many of them butt up against some of the great state parks that we have here. And I've kind of begun hiking in them because they have these beautifully maintained logging roads. There's hardly ever anybody there. It's much easier to get around than the narrow, not as well maintained trails in the state parks. It's interesting because as you say, there are huge areas that are still owned by the logging companies, but often they don't log there.
Right. I just found it interesting to know that there's private property that
yes,
in which the logging companies still have the rights to the wood.
Yes. Yeah, rights get diced up. That's something you learn as a real estate lawyer, is that There's many, many rights and properties, and they can be sliced and diced many, many ways. I'll also throw in one additional thing. If you drive up to Lake Tahoe, my son and I are on our way there tonight. If you ever have a chance, I'd encourage you to ride the Amtrak train that goes. You probably don't want to ride it any farther east than Reno, but that's a particularly beautiful railroad trip. And once I had pretty much exhausted the South Pacific coast, I started trying to learn the history and even walk a bit of the Transcontinental Railroad that goes through, that goes up to Donner Pass. Beautiful, beautiful area. You have to be a bit more careful in that area, of course, because they have very large freight trains on it that are moving very, very fast. But some really spectacular pieces of railroad engineering and just enormously beautiful scenery there as well.
Cool advice. Let's get one more question in. Farheen, you're up.
Thank you for your presentation. That was awesome. I am curious, well, two things. One, where did your love for trains come from?
Well, the funny thing is I really wasn't, I think like many boys, I played with trains when I was a child, but I put that away like most children fairly early on. And it didn't really come back until I started, when I had my son, who was born in 2005. There's kind of a tourist steam train in the Santa Cruz Mountains called Roaring Camp, which if you have children or you're interested in trains, I would encourage you to visit. And so he went through a period where he liked to go on trains, and so we would ride that. And again, like myself and like most boys, when he got older, he wasn't interested in that anymore. But unfortunately, for some reason, it reawakened this interest in me, and I wasn't able to get rid of it. Perhaps I'll move on to something else. Quilting is probably cheaper. It's also, as I often joke, oops, sorry. Let me bring back my screen for a second to share my screen. And give me a second here to get out of it. As I often say in the talks that I give, I owe a great debt to my wife, Zenaida. We've seen in this photograph, she permits me to carry out the strange hobby of exploring abandoned railroads for two reasons. One, it doesn't cost anything. And two, the chances of accidentally meeting single women exploring abandoned railroads is pretty much zero. So she's okay with it.
Nice. And then my follow-up to that is, I do hope that you take a lovely trip to Japan, which I would say is the land of the railroad.
Yes.
Because there are some really incredibly beautiful, just train stations and railroads. And probably one of my most favorite memories of being there is during cherry blossom season, when you're going through, you're on a train. And I like to sit right up front, right? You can see everything. And just there's cherry blossom trees right there, and you're just going right through it. And it's really, really beautiful. So
I would love to.
Style points for that comment, for sure. Cool. All right, and so we've run our time, so I want to encourage all of you who are attending to let us know you attend. There is a little blank, little form just a bit down the page that allows you to say, I was here. And if you are a visiting Rotarian who is one of those honorable people who says, I'm going to have 100% attendance because all Rotarians know that's cool. You want to get your hit of Rotary every week, a little energy, a little inspiration, things like that. And you put your email address in properly, you'll get a note back that you can pass along to your club secretary as a makeup for a missed meeting on your club. For everybody as well, there is the Discuss, D-I-S-Q-U-S section at the bottom of our page, and we want you to leave comments. What did you think about this program? What did you think about other elements of our meeting? How might you respond to other comments that people have left? Let that be a place for some discussion. So we love having people come and visit, and we hope you'll tell people about our club and our efforts to share inspiring stories each and every week. And with that, I'd like to give the last word, as we always do, to our speaker. Brian?
So this is not really meant to be a talk about railroads. As I often say, it's a subject that delights middle-aged men the world over and inspires terror and loathing among teenagers and spouses. But it's really meant to be a talk about enjoying something that you love, whatever it is. We live in an age now where if there's something you've always wanted to learn more about, it's much easier to do it now than it ever was. In this particular case, this weird particular thing of an abandoned railroad in the mountains is something that really gave my life a great deal of meaning and flavor and allowed me to inspire other people. And I'm very glad that it happened. It could have been about anything, and I hope it will be something great for you too.
Thank you for the presentation, and we look forward to seeing all of you who are attending next week as well.